Dr. El Mary is going to be our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen. She is an education consultant and e-learning project manager from the Department of Education Innovation, University of Pretoria. She obtained a master's degree cum laude and PhD in computer-assisted education and has been involved with e-learning and other educational projects. She is the education consultant for the Faculty of Veterinary Science, and her special interests are online assessment, staff development, and student experience in veterinary education. She published and presented papers at national and international conferences and platforms on these topics and is continuously involved in education research. Let's go ahead and welcome her on board.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to my session on the evolution of online assessment. My name is Mostert, and I work at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, of course, and I'm work in the Department for Education Innovation. Excuse me, and we are very involved with online teaching and learning and assessment as well. I would like to start with this quote by Carol Ann Tomlinson, where she said, "Assessment is today's means of modifying tomorrow's instruction." And I think in the current situation, we can even turn it around and say, with regard to the situation today and the way that we need to teach based on what happened in the world with COVID-19, we can actually say that today's instruction is modifying tomorrow's assessment, or even the way that we should assess now. But if we look at online assessment, which is the focus of my paper, we can think, where did it all start? And immediately, if anybody talks about online assessment, we think about multiple choice type questions, because they're the easiest to develop in an online environment and also being used very extensively. But it already started late in the 19th century, where there were paper-based multiple choice type questions for standardized tests. So it's something that's been developed for a very long time. Then in around 1937, IBM designed a bubble sheet type application where they developed this special mark sense pencil, and students or test takers could mark a specific area on that sheet, and they had a special device that could read that and then in such a way get some results. But it was a very expensive operation because they needed this specific special pencil to do it with. And there was a lot of developments by other people in the meantime. And then in 1962, a patent was registered in the US that developed this optical mark reader scanners, and that we've known for many years. It's been used in education as long as I can remember. When I did some online or distance education, that was the way that we were assessed, with these optical mark readers, and you get a bubble sheet and you need to complete your assessment that way. But then as things developed around in the 1980s, people really didn't want to go the paper-based route anymore. They said, we need to do some electronic assessments now. It is very time-using to use these optical mark readers. The machines are not that reliable always. So we developed an electronic version of a bubble sheet on a computer. And now all of a sudden students could do it online. It was still mostly MCQs because the other question types was a bit too difficult, but students could get their feedback immediately. So one of the educational advantages of the electronic version was that students already after the assessment could know how they did and what they did right and what they did incorrectly. But these tests were mostly done in a controlled environment, like a test center or a computer laboratory, and it was very basic. It only really focused on MCQs. But then came the 90s, and then learning management systems became on the order of the day. Every higher institution that could afford to implement such a system did that. And education in higher education institutions changed from a purely face-to-face to mostly a hybrid kind of a model, where some classes happened face-to-face in a lecture venue and others did in a online environment. And the learning management system were used to facilitate this type of teaching. The assessment tools that came with the learning management systems were mostly quizzes, like we did with the MCQs now. It was incorporated into that LMS. Students could upload their assignments electronically. They needn't hand in paper-based assignments anymore. And then one unique feature now was the discussion boards, where students could discuss with each other, either synchronously or asynchronously, anything with regard to specific content in their learning modules or in their subjects. And that was quite a nice add onto the learning management systems. Currently, we know that there are so many features, I wouldn't even try to list them here. But while all these things were happening, all the technological advances with regard to teaching and learning, there was also a bit of a focus shift from the behaviorist pedagogies to a more constructivist approach. And the feeling was that students should take more responsibility for their own learning, but also be responsible to create content and create their own learning pathway, if I can call it that. Inquiry-based learning became a very important part of teaching, and not only spoon-feeding anymore, but students being active learners in the higher education environment. But that could not happen without being linked to the technology, of course. And the LMS has developed rapidly and added more and more features that really helped the teachers to be very effective in the facilitation of learning, and not so much teaching as such anymore, but more facilitating. And all these technological advances assisted them with that. So that in a sense, they combined the shift of the pedagogy with the advances in technology. The focus now became active learning, a very high premises on student engagement, as well as feedback and the importance of feedback. And all of a sudden, the value of feedback was really taken into consideration in all teaching environments. But then, as you all know, and I'm so sure everybody's tired of hearing this, in 2020, COVID-19 arrived. And internationally, it really turned education on its head. All of a sudden, online teaching became the norm, from primary school up to higher education level, as well as assessment, of course, because you couldn't get together to have sit-down assessments at that stage anymore. So what were the challenges that we experienced then? There were students, especially in our environment, that did really not have access to the necessary devices. So they couldn't continue with their studies if they didn't get assistance with regard to the proper devices. We had a project where all students could apply, and laptops and other devices were handed out on a loan basis to them, but at least they could continue in that way. The second challenge were mostly about internet access. Not all areas has internet access, and even if you had it, the data costs were very expensive. So students needed assistance with that as well. The last thing that I mentioned here was the environment where they needed to study. They were used to being in a residence where they had proper facilities and they could study. And now they were all of a sudden at home. In some cases, they had to assist with housekeeping tasks, and the environment was really not conducive to learning. There might have been other challenges, but I don't think I can list all of them here. But taking all these things into consideration and the fact that everybody had to be online now and not be able to be on campus, we needed to think of alternative online assessment methods and not the few that I've mentioned before. But in the same vein, lecturers also realized that they cannot only focus on the technology and the tools that's available. They must still keep the academic integrity of their courses intact. And to do that, you need to focus on your learning outcome and align that with your teaching, the way that you teach it, and the way that you are going to assess it. And with that in mind, we had a look at all the different tools that is available in our learning management system. So the lecturers in my institution really had a hard look at what is available, how can they link it to the outcomes and assess the outcomes of their modules really in the way that it should be done. So, of course, we started with the quizzes again, using objective items, but now there was a variety of question types that one can use, and not only multiple choice questions, which made it a lot easier and a lot more user-friendly in a sense that you could really test on higher cognitive levels as well. You could add any type of media, or videos, sound files, graphics, slides. So it was really becoming the tool of choice in many cases because it was so easy to implement and there was no marking done by the lecturers as such. Students got immediate feedback. But it didn't fit into all the subject areas or disciplines. So in some cases, adaptive testing was also necessary. And for that, we used an in-video assessment tool where you play a video, you add questions in between, and based on the student's response, you could guide them and they create kind of a path to get to the end result. Online simulations in some disciplines were also a very popular way to do the assessment. And of course, essay questions that in a form of an assignment that they had to upload, there would always be that need because students need to be able to debate and to write essays, especially in specific disciplines. What was developed was an on-screen marking tool, which made it much more easier for lecturers to do the marking. And in the LMS, one could also link the rubrics to a specific assignment, and it made the marking much easier because you really had good criteria developed to start with, but with a click of the button, you could mark your students' assignments, and the marks would be in the grade centers for use in determining their final mark. Then one of the things that were very useful, especially with the postgrad modules or subjects, was the graded discussion boards, discussions, blogs, and wikis, sometimes even journals, but the discussions were the most popular, being used by the postgrad lecturers. And there they measured the students' contribution, but not only the amount or how much they contributed, but what the quality of that was as well. And based on that, they would get a mark, usually also with a very well-designed rubric linked to it in order to be very fair to all the students. In one of the subject areas specifically, they stated that they needed to do oral examinations. That's the way that it's always been done. And to be fluent orally is one of the outcomes of that subject area. For instance, in law, that would be one of the examples. They then started to use Zoom applications. In our learning management system, we have Collaborate, but there was the Teams that one could use Zoom or many other of these applications were available. So they did online orals with panels, which was very successful. The students appreciated the opportunity to do the orals and not only be tested on theory, but also be able to discuss things and to have the conversations with their lecturers. And then the last one that was also quite popular was the e-portfolios, where students had to collect artifacts to indicate that they reached specific outcomes. This was also for the postgrad students a very handy tool to use. Of course, there were challenges, as I said, with the devices and data and internet access and so on. But then we implemented online proctoring, especially when they used the quiz tool. And that created other problems because it's quite data intensive, which they didn't really have. It takes a lot of bandwidth as well, which could also become a problem. So that's quite still a challenge for us to use the online proctoring applications. But then lecturers also said, how do I know that my students are not guessing? I don't want them to guess and then pass my module, because people often think that multiple choice and objective items are quite easy to answer. And one way that they tried to negate that was to use negative marking. Students didn't like it very much, but they were informed beforehand that if you don't know, rather not guess, but because we will use negative marking. The other way that it could be done, and a few lecturers tried that as well, was to add a follow-up question and ask the students to indicate the level of confidence. I was very confident that my answer is correct. And in a sense, they used that also to try to negate the guessing by students. But even a bigger challenge, I think, than guessing was the fact that students cheated. And unfortunately, I'm of the belief that our future professionals will be honest. But unfortunately, it wasn't the case all over. So there was a lot of thinking about how can we prevent them from cheating. But the ways that they cheated, one of the ways was that they got somebody else to impersonate them. So somebody else would log in, a previous student or somebody knowledgeable about the subject, and they would do the assessment on that student's behalf. With the online proctoring, we could take that away as a possible risk, because at least there you could see who the person was, and we had photographs, of course, on our databases of all the students. But the second way that they cheated was to use additional resources. And because our cell phones are advanced computers already, in a sense, they could access resources to help them to answer some of the questions. But then we also did some training with the lecturers and told them you should never ask a question that is Googleable. Don't allow the student to be able to Google the question. Focus on application, and that really made a big difference. The online proctoring, of course, and secure browser was used to try to prevent them from this. And then also we used the anti-plagiarism software that indicated what the similarities between the students' work and what is available out there was. And in that way, students also knew that they would get that opportunity to present their work through that program, and then we will know whether they've plagiarized or just copied from somewhere else. The one thing that we don't really know how to get rid of is contract cheating, where ghostwriters are contracted to do your exam or to do your assignment, and that's often not so easy to detect. I know that not in South Africa yet, but I saw that in the UK there are even what they call essay mills, where people really do a lot of essays and sell it to students, which is a pity, but unfortunately we need to be aware of that and that it is possible. So that is the current status. But if we think about online assessment, and we don't really want to focus only on the situation with regard to the COVID situation, we can say, what does the future hold for online assessment? I think virtual reality, in some cases, already being part of developments, but I think that will be play really a large role in online assessment, because it will assist in creating environments where more authentic assessment can be done. And it will be a safe space where students will be able to do that. I think it's also expensive developments, but I think it will be done in the very near future. It will be in use. Artificial intelligence is already in some programs available, and it will also make a difference in tailor-making a learning path and linking them to the assessment for specific learners. But I think because assessment and teaching is such an important part of our getting people to be professionals in specific disciplines, there are some questions that we need to ask with regard to online assessment and teaching in general. I would like to know whether the technology is really versatile enough to assess all the outcomes. Is it really authentic? And I think there's a lot of, it depends on the discipline, of course, but there's a lot of research being done to determine that. The second thing, can the use of technology influence the student result or performance? I mean, we accept that all students are computer literate and they are comfortable working in the online environment, but is it really the truth? Is it really applicable to all students? And may it influence his or her performance when doing an assessment online? Do we adapt our assessment to link to the available technologies, to use what is available and see how we can fit our assessment in there, instead of looking at the outcome and see what is the best way to use it? And then I think, although there is a lot of research being done, I ask the question, has the use of online assessment in different disciplines been researched enough? And I think because it is such an important part of the learning and teaching process that we really need to encourage even more research, although there is a lot available already. I would like to conclude with this quote that says, the primary purpose of assessment is to improve student learning. And I think we should keep that in mind and be careful not to focus so much on the technology and forget what assessment is all about. I thank you very much. I don't see any questions. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Elmarie. Hope you had a great time presenting. We had great time listening to you. We have a couple of questions coming in the chat box. Kindly have a look at it.
Okay, the first one says, very, very useful information. A bit curious though, can all this be possible? Oh goodness, now I've lost the question. Sorry, let me just get to the chat again. When an online class has 350 students and only one professor managing the class, yes, it is very difficult, and I think that is one of the reasons why people opt for the quiz option, because there's no marking that needs to be done. In our case, 350 students is not the biggest classes that we have. We have some that's really up to 2,000 students. They will not probably be possible to do e-portfolios or written papers. I just want to read here in online assessment, how can I make sure that learners understood the topic well? And I think what we did was to really try to do continuous assessment, and that is where the use of the objective items and the quiz tool was very helpful. We even have workshops with our lecturers to teach them how to set up proper multiple choice type questions, because it's not so easy to do. People think it's very easy to do, but to try to do it on higher levels, and really in that way, that's the only way, with continuous assessment, to see whether your students really understand and really are really understanding what they should. But I agree with you, with all the written papers, it is difficult with so many students, but if you use a properly developed rubric, it's also much easier, where you can, you've got very well written criteria, then that can help.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mary, for talking about the evolution of online assessment, and it was a pleasure listening to you. We have a lot of questions pouring in, so due to the time crunch, we're going to go ahead and email it to you, and you can go ahead and reply back to our delegates. So that way
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. It was an honor having you here with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Good.